Hello, guys. Now we're going to talk about, the market dumping, is it over, when you should buy and all that stuff. But before we actually start with that, I want to ask you guys a question. What level of human warrior are you? Now, there's several tiers and we'll lay them out. And it's determined by what is the toughest animal that you can defeat with just an axe in one-to-one Mortal Kombat. So, if you're a tier 1 human, well, if you're a tier 0 human, you can't defeat any of these animals. Tier 1 is you can defeat a fox. Tier 2 is you can defeat a coyote. Tier 3, you can defeat a wolf, and not just any wolf of a pack, the alpha wolf of a pack. And remember, you only have an axe, no gun, nothing else. And you are stuck in fight to the death, Mortal Kombat. Tier 4 is a mountain lion. Tier 5 is an actual lion. Tier 6 is a polar bear. And Tier 7 is a T-Rex. So all the way up from Tier 0, I can't defeat any of these animals, to Tier 7, I can defeat a resurrected T-Rex. What tier of human warrior are you? And remember, what tier of animal can you defeat with an axe? Armed with nothing but an axe? That's the question. Okay, now put your answer down in the comments. Now, back to crypto. So, is it over? What happened today? Why did we dump all that much? Is it because the Fed didn't cut? Not exactly. It's because they revised the labor numbers down for the last 2 months. And this could actually be seen coming because what they did is like Doge, how they fired a bunch of those people. They didn't actually fire a lot of them. They put them on like indefinite furlough until about 1 or 2 months in, and then they actually fired them. So a lot of the adjustment is actually adjusting for the people that were not technically fired, who are now technically fired, because government layoffs, they do take a while sometimes. They were able to fire some people immediately, but for some people they were not immediately fired. They were put on furlough and they finally essentially got fired, I guess. So a lot of that was an adjustment to that. There's probably also some adjustment for illegal immigrants, getting kicked out of jobs and stuff, and ICE. And those are kind of like unexpected things that you can't really account for during the month of operation. So like after 2 months, they get more and more data in. And obviously the estimates are off when you have situations like that. So essentially like the last 2 months have been estimated up. Now it's estimated down, which actually Donald Trump should actually be pretty happy about, because now since the labor numbers are down, in September, he's going to get his rate cut. See, the thing is, like, he wants his rate cut while the economy is doing great and the unemployment is low. That almost never happens. The Fed pretty much only cuts when unemployment is rising and the economy is in trouble. Now you have the labor numbers and the economy is in trouble, and Jerome Powell is going to have to rate cut in September. I doubt he's going to do an emergency rate cut because the whole country didn't just shut down like COVID. And of course, we didn't have a fallout like '08, but he will have to cut in September. And that's the silver lining to today's drop. Yes, the labor numbers were bad, but that could honestly be it's probably not a one-time off thing, because the effect is probably going to carry on several months. Placing government workers on furlough, and of course ICE doing like raids on farms, like manufacturing plants and all that stuff. So that will be felt through the subsequent months as well. I expect the labor numbers for this next several months to be revised downward when they actually revisit it for that reason. So expect dumps on those days. But overall, in the long run, this could actually be good for us because it is a signal that rates need to be cut, and Jerome Powell will actually cut rates, or more and more of the Fed board is going to dissent with him. So no, it is not over. I actually think this could actually set us up for an even bigger bull run in the fall or the winter, because he will need to cut more and more. The worse the labor numbers get, the more Powell needs to cut. If the labor numbers were actually really good, he could actually hold steady. Because remember, Powell's or the Fed's mandate, the dual mandate, is unemployment and inflation. And inflation, because of the tariffs, have started to go up. It went from 2.4 to 2.7 last time. And so that tells Powell not to cut. And if unemployment remains low at 4.2 or something, that doubly tells them not to cut. But now unemployment has crept up to 4.3, and I think it's going to continue to creep up in the next couple of months. Remember, the Fed is mostly a reactive agency. It reacts to the numbers the economy spits out. It doesn't really try to drive the economy either in one way or the other. The policies of loosening or tightening depend on like, if inflation is increasing and like if unemployment is increasing or decreasing. But now, since the data has been adjusted, he will actually have to cut in September, maybe by 50 basis points, but I still think 25. Most of the Fed governors will essentially say 25. So today, yes, temporary backwards for the stock market, for the crypto market, but I think we should actually recover fairly quickly. Alts were hit pretty hard this time, and I think like if you look at the MACD, for Bitcoin, it's actually more and more negative. Technically, like in this direction, we're negative on the daily, but we're still overall positive on the weekly for the MACD if you look. Yes, the weekly is getting a little bit lower, but it looks like it's holding up pretty well. And that generally means like we're not going for a gigantic dip, a la the one we just went for in like from February to May, or from May of 24 to October of 24. We're not going for that kind of dip because the MACD is still positive on the weekly, but it being bad on the daily basically means we might dip for the next 4 or 5 days. So that's kind of like the data you have to look at if you're swing trading. If you're just long-term holding, you should just hold. This is a chance for you to pick up cheaper alts. So I don't think we'll actually have a drop like from 109 to about 70,000 like we did last time when Trump announced the tariffs. Like, yes, the employment numbers are bad, but they're not like such a huge shock like with the Trump tariffs. I think we could visit like, the 100,000s, maybe at most like the 90,000s, but probably stay in the 100,000s even if we continue to go down some more. Like I said, I'm looking at like 105 or so as possibly the bottom point. If we continue dipping, we could just bounce back. And over the weekend, I don't expect too much movement, maybe slightly bearish over the weekend. But like some of the alts have already started to bounce back a little bit, and most of them will probably start to bounce back over the course of time, over the next couple of days. If Bitcoin goes down a little bit more, I think alts, like I said, could stand to lose 10 or 15%, but then should actually have a fairly fast U-shaped recovery going into the rest of the summer. Now, I don't think alts are going to raise that high. I do think like it is still going to be fall, winter when we actually have our huge pump. And that is because fall, winter is like after we get the rate cuts. And he might actually cut twice now because of the revised economic data. He's going to cut once in September, and then he's going to look at like November. And if the jobless claims keep on adding up, if the economy keeps on adding less jobs, he will cut again. Now, I don't think he'll cut more than twice, but he will probably cut twice now because of the revised numbers. So the numbers definitely have a big silver lining in terms of crypto. In terms of the overall stock market and in terms of the overall, like, people looking for jobs, it's not good. I haven't seen too many people actually be laid off, but I have noticed that people that are looking for jobs are finding it harder and harder to find them in this particular market. So if you are a recent graduate, kind of sucks to be you. But overall, like if you already have a job, unless you work at like one of the big tech companies, or you work for the government, you're most likely not going to be laid off. If you're on indefinite furlough from the government, you're probably going to get fired, maybe with a severance, maybe not with a severance. So you should definitely be starting to look for another job at this point. And I don't see the labor market getting any better, which means there's not going to be a turnaround where Powell actually changes his mind. Now, if the numbers actually came out before the FOMC meeting earlier this week, I think Powell would have actually cut. But the data didn't actually come out until today. And for that reason, we didn't really get a cut this time around. So yeah, kind of like weird how things actually worked out. But we will be getting rate cuts, it looks like, throughout the rest of this year. Probably 0.5 basis points down. That'll bring us down to around, I think, like 3.75, which is getting more and closer to the neutral rate. Once you get around 3, I mean, unless the economy completely tanks, you probably wouldn't cut anymore. Because like the neutral rate's around 2 or 2.5. But realistically, the median rate for the last 50 years, excluding outlying years, which would be like the early 80s and probably like the 2010s, would be about 4 or 5%. He probably wants to get like directly below that, around maybe like 3%. And that way, like, your your interest rate on like a new house or something will be like 5% instead of 7%. You don't really want the interest rate on the new house to be too low for the economy because then housing prices will grow massively like they did the last couple of decades. But you also don't want, 8 or 9% interest rate because that would pretty much kill the real estate market and prevent housing prices from going up in most areas. Also would be a drag on the economy because people just can't really borrow money to do anything at that specific point. So yeah, economy, like I'm not too worried about it. Yes, there are some worrying signs. Yes, they did actually revise the numbers down, but that was to be expected because of the Doge firings and also because of the ICE raids for illegal immigration. Like I said, I don't expect the labor's numbers to actually recover for a couple of months. So it'll give us a couple of months of negative data on to the BLS. And according to those numbers, the BLS should actually make the Fed actually cut rates. Now, here's the thing. Trump actually fired the BLS lady and is going to replace him with one of his guys. But if he actually forces like that guy or girl to like make good numbers for him, that will just get Jerome Powell to cut less. Like that's what it's really going to achieve. Like I don't think Trump has like made this like connection with like, oh, bad economic numbers, bad employment numbers equals big rate cut. He still thinks like, oh, I can get a big rate cut while everything's going fine, while the stock market's at all-time highs, and while unemployment's high. But that's really not how like the Fed actually operates. They've always kind of cut in times of crisis. They don't really cut when things are like really are going very, very well. Because essentially the interest rate stuff is kind of like a controller for the market. If things are going poorly, you release more money to boost it up. If things are going too well, you actually tighten it. So like, spending doesn't actually get out of control. So that's kind of been like the Fed's role. So like I said, it's not over. I still think like this actually probably increases the chances that we get a big bull run. And overall, like the market isn't really that bad. I would hang on to your crypto unless you're swing trading. If you're swing trading, I might sell and then buy back in a couple of days later. Although the time to sell might have actually been last week when the MACD started going negative. That's actually been a pretty good signal. Like when the MACD starts going negative, about a week later, we will actually start dumping. That's actually been pretty accurate. And that's the daily MACD. Like when the daily MACD starts crossing negative, you want to basically sell and then like buy back like a week and a half or 2 weeks later, especially on altcoins. That's kind of like the signal that you want to look for. I think that's been like more solid than all the other signals. Of course, there's the 50 and 200 MA. Right now, we are still above the 50 MA, which is good, and the 50 MA and the 200 MA are still being separated by a large distance, unlike when tariffs started and they started kind of like collapsing back together. If that happens, we definitely could go for a lower dip, but I actually think some people have figured it out that like bad economic numbers, especially bad employment numbers, are going to force Jerome Powell to cut, and I do think there's going to be kind of like a response to that. In that we won't dip that much lower. So that's the news for today. Let me know what you think. Like and subscribe, hit that bell notifications button. Thank you and have a nice day.